Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we're continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and the Ukraine. Now, over the last 24 hours, 48 hours, I have seen several reports coming from news outlets such as The Economist, on the Ukrainian side, I believe it's the Kiev Post, and other mainstream media outlets here in the West. And what they're talking about is ongoing Russian losses. They're stating that they believe that upwards to 600 to 700,000 Russian troops, may have been killed and wounded in the ongoing war. Now, what's very interesting is you hear nothing at all about Ukrainian losses. Now, even Volodymyr Zelensky, the current unelected president of the Ukraine, admits that his country is being hit per week with about 600 glide bombs. Each one of these anywhere from 500 pounds upwards to 6,000 pounds. 600 per week. With an additional 40 attacks by precision-guided ballistic missiles. And hundreds of drones a week. Now, the Ukrainians admittedly declare that they are not responding in kind with that kind of firepower. They can't. And I haven't even talked about artillery data, which is 7 to 10 times higher than what the Ukrainians are using. So if the Russian casualty rate is 700,000 over the course of the conflict, what is the Ukrainian casualty rate? Now, I got to tell you, we here at MFAN do not believe that the Russian casualty rate is that high. Eventually, as this war comes to an end, and we will eventually see a Russian victory, I would say at this point, a Russian victory is about 98.9% assured. It's going to happen for a number of reasons. Look, the Ukrainians may win some battles. They may have some success. They may strike deep inside the Russian Federation, and that's going to be reported. But at the end of the day, the ability for Western nation states to continue this war, given the political environments right now that are taking shape in Western Europe and the United States, the likelihood that these nations are going to continue to provide hundreds of billions of dollars to the Ukrainians. While here in the West, here in the United States, in Hawaii, not one house has been rebuilt in Maui. And the town of Lahaina burnt down. Not one building has been rebuilt. And I've talked about this before. And yet, hundreds of billions of dollars to the Ukraine. The United States, the people of the United States, are going to tire of this. They are not going to want to give money forever to the Ukrainians, especially as they continue to learn and gain an understanding of the conflict. Now, obviously, there's going to be the uninformed urbanite who is going to wave the Ukrainian flag and pretend as if they are Ukrainian, which they are not. Now, what I also want to talk about is history. So let's say hypothetically that indeed, over the course of 3 years, 700,000 Russian troops have been killed or wounded. Let's just hypothetically acquiesce and say, okay, it's possible. I want to go back in history. I want to go back in time to the year 1943. I want to start at July 5th, 1943, and take you to August 23rd, 1943. About just over a month and a half. This is the Battle of Kursk, also known as Operation Citadel by the Germans. Now, the forces involved in this battle, and I'll take you to this locale, essentially where it occurred, inside what is now the Russian Federation. 780,000 German troops, backed by almost 3,000 tanks and almost 10,000 pieces of artillery, engaged 1.9 million Russian troops, backed by 5,000 tanks and 25,000 pieces of artillery. This led to eventually the Soviet counteroffensive within the same period of time, in which 2.5 million Soviet or Russian troops were involved. Now, the casualties. In the Battle of Kursk, just over a month, the Russians, in terms of soldiers being killed or missing, numbered between 254,000 and 450,000. The numbers of wounded exceeded 600,000. One battle. So, in the grand scope of things, even if, hypothetically speaking, we have seen those kinds of Russian losses which we don't believe has occurred. Again, the Russians are predominantly using lots of air power, lots of glided bombs, and lots of artillery to slowly degrade and destroy the Ukrainian military. Are the Russians losing troops? Yes, absolutely. But it is believed that, in reality, the Ukrainians are losing far more. And most of that, again, is coming from the use of what we would call today as standoff weapon systems. Glide bombs, thousands of rounds of 152 millimeter, 130 millimeter, 122 millimeter artillery, multiple launch rocket systems, Iskander ballistic missile systems, KH-59s and 69s, KH-101s and Caliber cruise missiles per month. And these are the things that are causing these massive casualties. So do your own research. Look at the Battle of Kursk and ask yourself, have we really reached a point in which the Russians are exhausting themselves? It looks like the Russians are pacing themselves in a war of attrition simply designed to wear down the Ukrainian military and cause an eventual collapse. And yes, a lot of what is happening right now on the ground is going to be the decision-making processes of the West. Does the West continue to supply weapons and equipment? And I talked about the Swedish armored fighting vehicle, the CV-90. Very good piece of equipment. The Ukrainians have 50 of them. Is 50 CV-90s going to change the outcome of this conflict? No, absolutely not. There's talk now that the Ukrainians could receive up to 1,000 CV-90s produced in Czechoslovakia and other Eastern European states. But is that going to change the outcome of the war? No, probably not. Again, the Russians cannot lose this conflict. They can't. That's the way they see it. The West is a little different. As I engage with people and have conversations with colleagues, I will ask the question, especially older groups that grew up during the Cold War. And I'll ask the question, well, back in 1985, you were perfectly okay with the Ukraine being part of the Soviet Union. That was not an issue. Why is it an issue now? Is the survival of the Ukraine, should it be an imperative for the United States? Is the United States, or the disunited states, the ununited states, going to end if the Ukraine does not remain free? And I would argue that the potential for a escalation, the eventual start of global war with the use of first tactical nuclear weapons and then strategic nuclear weapons, is at a higher risk if Ukraine continues to exist. And I know it's hard for you to get your head around, and I know hearing that may cause some people to be disgruntled. But the reality is, if Ukraine ceases to exist, the prospects for global war, a massive war between the East, a Eurasian alliance of Russia and China, is lowered. Versus a state in which you have this nation state called the Ukraine being armed by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and essentially becoming a NATO proxy state, which essentially it is now, and it is being used in this third world proxy war against the Russians. And yet people will say, well, it was the Russian decision to invade Ukraine. The Ukrainians did not invade Russia. Well, look, the West was very much aware of the red lines for Russia. That having NATO move into Ukraine was a non-starter. It was a red line. It is a red line. And this is how we have ended up where we're at right now. So again, look at history. Look at what happened during World War II. Look at the battlefield casualties, the losses. And again, we've not really scratched the surface on how vicious this conflict could actually get, especially if it expands. Especially if we see the onset of war taking place in the Baltic states, if we see the countries of Poland, France, Germany actually start to put boots on the ground inside of the Ukraine and start to fight the Russians. The war expands, it gets larger. And then finally we find ourselves in a place that we don't want to be in. And again, right now, I think where some of the countries on the planet are right now, especially this conflict between Russia and the West, is much greater chance of escalation than at any point during the Cold War. I mean, we never saw what we are seeing right now during the Cold War. It didn't happen. And to say that that capability that Russia possesses right now is not the same capability, if not more, than what existed in the Soviet Union in terms of nuclear capability, you're fooling yourself. But right now, it's going to continue to be a war of attrition until the Ukrainian war machine and the Western war machine that is keeping it alive and on life support collapses and the Ukrainian military falls apart. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of time. Is it how long the West is going to continue to provide weapons and assistance and intelligence to the Ukrainians? That will play a part in how long this goes. But again, the West will tire before the Russians do. I guarantee you. Beyond a shadow of a doubt, the West will tire. There will be political changes in the West before there are political changes in the desire to prevent NATO expansion into the Ukraine, or even a secret expansion by making the Ukraine a proxy state of the Western European powers in the United States. They're not going to allow it. The Russians, are simply not going to allow it. So we will continue to watch what's happening on the ground very, very closely. As always, thank you for joining us today. More to come very, very soon. Have a good day.